Everything you said we already knew, more or less.
Well, here's something that you didn't know. 2 of those special atomic bombs haven't gone off.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Mark Boyle from Hello High Fat Diet. It just happens to be my day off also, and I thought I would put together a podcast on this coming issue of Hello High Fat Diet called Going Paleo. So one of the things I wanted to talk about most with this issue was the idea of diet and the paleo diet. And I think the paleo diet is a great diet. Don't get me wrong. The article that I wrote that will accompany this seems to be a slam against the paleo diet, and that is not my intention whatsoever. One thing I do need to make clear with my podcast and my post, and this is why a lot of my posts and articles will be going onto the membership side of the website. It is free for now, and you can choose to help me keep the lights on, basically, by paying a little bit, but that is totally voluntary. But otherwise, everything is free. I just need to have some form of disclaimer on there stating that these are opinions only and that I am not a doctor. Now, I make it real clear that I am not a doctor, but it does tend to piss off big government and the medical establishment when people say things that run contrary to their valued belief system. And I make it a policy to constantly rip on the garbage science that they call diet in America today. Now, this applies to most countries, so I'm just from America, so I'm sure your government also has disclaimers abounding everywhere on the use of medical advice. That is why I will be going to a membership-based site, so that disclaimer will be there and you have to accept the terms, which are nothing but a bunch of legalese that has nothing to do with diet and everything to do with keeping my ass out of trouble and confusing you. It is better if most people understand that most websites that talk about health, diet, and nutrition are more of an informational base. So that's my little disclaimer, just for FYI. So what is the paleo diet? Well, it leads one to believe by its name that it is a Paleolithic diet. It's kind of what the caveman ate, in theory. My problem with it is that much of the websites and information I was able to gather in studying the paleo diet and personally studying the Paleolithic diet for years is that they still have quite a bit of the misinformation dripping or leaking into what they teach or advise you to eat. So one of them being lean meat. Meat in the caveman days was probably pretty lean and grass-fed because they didn't have big ranches. But depending on the time of the year that you killed an animal, it may have quite a bit of fat content because a lot of animals will fatten themselves up before winter, and it's natural. And so a Paleolithic man would have been eating lean meat all the way up to exceedingly fat meats, depending on the time of year in which they were lucky enough to kill something and eat it. So to say that you should always eat lean meat is basically to me like saying that they were going more for protein than fat. Protein is good. We need that. But I think most meat in the caveman days or the Paleolithic period and even today is balanced quite well by nature to have the right amount of fat and protein in a balance that is good for us. I believe that we should be meat eaters, and therefore if we're getting the balance from that animal as we kill them and eat them, then we're not trying to select lean cuts of meat. We're just eating whatever we find. One of the other things with the Paleolithic diet is a heavy push for fish and seafood. Well, fishing was not that easy of an operation before We turned it into a hobby and an art form. There was no fishing boats at the time of the Paleolithic man. And if you've ever watched a season or two of Naked and Afraid, catching fish is not always all that easy. I'm not saying that they didn't eat fish, but it wasn't a major part of their diet unless they were lucky enough to be living in certain areas of the world where there was salmon swimming upstream and just jumping out of the water to where they could catch them. Now, the Paleolithic man was known for his hunting skills, but I've never read anything about their fishing skills. So I'm not saying that they did not eat fish or seafood. It's just I don't think it was as readily available to the Paleolithic man as it is today. Seafood was not as widely eaten either because seafood requires going into the ocean and diving or making nets or crab traps. And most people, even in the beginning of America 200 years ago, as far as the people were concerned, you and I, folks, did not go into the ocean all that much. In fact, water was kind of a scary thing because people drowned in it, and the ocean had a fear factor to it that you didn't just run out there and grab fish. Now, if you lived on an island, then yeah, that might have been a big part of your diet. But most of the Paleolithic man comes from Europe, and therefore it would be reasonable to think that fishing and seafood was not always that high up in what they were able to get. So once again, it leads you to think that if you wish to eat a lot of fish today on the Paleolithic diet, it's available to you. You just run to the supermarket and there's, fish sticks, all kinds of fish. You can get it at McDonald's, a McFish sandwich or whatever. Back then, not so much. Now, they also have eggs in their meal plan for the paleo diet. And eggs are good. Eggs are damn near a perfect food. But put yourself back 20,000 years ago. Yes, birds were still laying eggs, but they were high up in trees and on cliffs and wherever. So they found them. They ate them. There's no question about that. But did they have a dozen eggs in their refrigerator at all times? No. Did they hard boil a bunch of eggs and store them? Well, maybe. But did they have dozens and dozens of eggs at any one given time? I don't think so. So they ate them. But once again, that is something in the paleo diet that they say, go crazy and eat eggs. Have at it. So that's kind of a false premise. So I kind of lumped seafood, fish, and eggs into one thing because they were available. People ate them. The Paleolithic man ate them. But it wasn't a big percentage of their diet because their diet was on a hunter-gatherer kind of way. So they gathered what they could get and they hunted. And so that was determined basically by what they were lucky enough to find in the season. So during the winter, do birds have babies? No. So during the winter months, they probably weren't eating eggs a lot. And they probably weren't getting a lot of fish with everything frozen over. And they weren't wading out in sub-zero water temperatures to grab fish. So I'm not thinking that they ate a lot of it, but yes, they did eat it. Now, vegetables, I can go on and on about. I personally don't eat vegetables because of the cellulose and fiber content in it. It gives me inflammation and IBS. But in the Paleolithic period of time, there weren't that many vegetables growing up out of the ground. So what you see in the supermarket produce section did not exist 20,000 years ago. There were varieties maybe of lettuce in certain parts and climates of the world, but maybe they lived there and maybe they did not. So did they have 15 kinds of lettuce? Did they have 30 to 40 different varieties of radishes and squash? Well, I don't know, but I'm thinking they kind of didn't, because in America, we didn't even see a banana until the 20s. So how did the founding fathers, or whatever you want to call them that's politically correct, how did they eat so much fruit? And so that is also part of the fruit section that they have in the paleo diet, is eat lots of fruit, but stay away from the sweeter fruit. Berries are good and have less sugar, but they still have sugar. It's fructose. It's a plant, so it's cellulose-based, and you don't get a lot of the vitamins out of vegetables or fruits if they're cellulose-based because our body doesn't have the enzyme to break it down. Now, in the juice of a fruit, there's a lot of fructose in it, but you can't factor in all the vitamins and stuff because you shouldn't be eating sweets. And I don't think that the cavemen or the Paleolithic man 20, 30,000 years ago ate a lot of fruits, mainly because a lot of them did not exist in the area in which they lived. And if you ever grow a fruit tree, just a single fruit tree on your property, you will see that the birds and the bugs eat the shit out of those things, and you're lucky to get maybe 1 or 2 apricots off that tree once it's in season. The birds will eat them while they're still green. And so if you want to eat something, it would be probably fortuitous if you're walking around hunting and you found a tree that had fruit on it, and you might climb up there and while you're looking for eggs, find an apple or a pear or whatever was around back then, and you would eat it. Now, while you go on your hunt, you'd think, boy, that was pretty good. When you come back, I guarantee you most of it's gone. The animals have eaten it. They don't waste time. So I see that they ate fruit, but once again, it was not a large part of the Paleolithic man's diet because nature, birds, bugs, everything, squirrels, they climb them trees and eat that stuff. Worms love them. So I don't know. Maybe they ate the fruit with the worm in it and got a little bit of protein out of it. Now, nuts are something similar to fruit. There's a season for it, and squirrels like them nuts, and they crawl off with them and hide them in their little burrows, and they store them. Now, the American Indian used to have a little trick where it would dig up part of the pack rat burrow and get some of the legumes out of there and the nuts or whatever, the little mice or whatever they were robbing at the time. And then they wouldn't take them all. They wouldn't leave the animal with nothing. And then they could make a dish with it. Sorry, my throat's a little messed up today. So it's kind of coming and going. 63 and still going through puberty. So the Indians had figured it out, but the Indians were not Paleolithic. They were modern man, modern woman. That was, a few hundred years ago. Now, the Indians did live way back in the day on South America and stuff, but they were still descendants of and not actual Paleolithic man. So the American Indians had learned how to find their burrows and get some of the fruit or the nuts or whatever was in there, the seeds, and eat them. Once again, it was not a large part of their diet. Now, they probably stored a lot of the nuts, for hunting and when it was winter and stuff. But for the most part, there's animals running around in the winter and in the summer. So they had meat to eat and they were good hunters. So even the American Indian would travel around and migrate from one area to another following the herds during the winter and the summer. So they always had a supply of meat. So nuts are on the list for paleo, but not peanuts because that's a legume. And legumes are grains and they're not all that good for you. But the reality is that nuts do have oil in them. But when they talk in the paleo about sauteing vegetables, they talk about using coconut oil or olive oil or peanut oil, something that's derived from a nut. And I don't think the Paleolithic man did that. They just didn't have a quart of peanut oil laying around or olive oil because they didn't have presses. So they ate the nuts. They did get the oil out of them, which is good, but it's more of a natural way because it's not processed. So they didn't melt nuts in their cooking thing to saute vegetables. In fact, they didn't have cooking pans for sauteing. So they didn't eat a lot of vegetables, and they might have put nuts in them and steamed them and got a little oil out of it. But for the most part, nuts were used for munchies, trail mix basically, and it was not, once again, a large part of their diet. It was a part, but not a huge part. So then it talks about natural oils, and that's where these natural oils come from, is from the nut. Now also they like nuts because they're big fans of almond flour and almond milk, Well, I guarantee you that the Paleolithic man did not get milk out of almonds. Might have got them out of lactating animals when they killed them, but it wasn't a big portion of their diet. And so they didn't have a substitute for milk, like almond milk. And they didn't have a substitute for flour because they didn't have grains at the time. They weren't agricultural based, so any grains that were out there, they might have used it and ground it in some way into flour. But I doubt they were using nuts for that because it was more valuable to them to carry around like a trail mix than to actually try to come up with a substitute for pancakes. So those are the hiccups, the little pet peeves that I have with the paleo diet and pretty much most diets when they're always constantly trying to find a substitute for our favorite food. If you have a favorite food and it's carb-based, then you should give it up or cut way the heck back on it and only eat your favorite pancakes once in a blue moon, whenever that is. Maybe once a month, have some pancakes. Use flour. Who the hell cares? It's still carbs. And don't worry about it. But if you're going to go into a good diet for health and for weight loss and for wellness, you need to cut carbs and stop looking for replacements of your favorite whatever. Just give it up. It's like methadone treatments. Quit or don't. So near beer's the same thing. If you have to have near beer, just drink beer. I mean, what the hell's the difference? There's just no alcohol in near beer, but it's still got all the carbs in it. Now they even have a paleo version of paleo approved beer. Just quit, if it's bad for you. Now, if you like drinking, take that edge off once in a while, then just drink hard liquor. There's no carbohydrates in it, and then there's nothing wrong with that. A little bit of wine once in a while, even though, yes, it's made from fruit, which is sweet and got carbs in it. A glass of wine once in a while because of the distillation process is a little different. And most good doctors on diet, like Greg Ellis, will tell you a glass of wine once in a while is not a big deal. You got to remember that, like, if you're on a low carb diet, you're on a low carb diet. You're not on a no carb diet. You can still have a few carbs now and then. And what I recommend to people is if you have favorite foods that you just can't live without, if you have a thing like you like to drink a glass of wine with your meal, save your carbs for those things that you truly enjoy and stop looking for substitutes. Just because you used to eat pancakes doesn't mean it's like one of your top 10 things that you can't live without. So save those carbs during your daily total of carbs for things that you really don't want to do without. A glass of wine with your meal. I put a little bit of sugar in my coffee. Why? Because I love coffee. It's got heavy whipping cream in it. It's got a lot of calories in it. And that's my energy drink for the morning. So yes, I'll put some sugar in it. And I try to keep that sugar and them carbs down throughout the day because I want my sugar. So I give up so many other carbs that maybe I would enjoy. Like I love French fries. Trust me, those things are good no matter who cooks them. But I don't eat them. Why? Because I want my sugar in my coffee. So it's a balancing act, and you have to come up with your own balance. So to me, becoming a hunter-gatherer or going paleo is really quite difficult to do in today's modern world. Gatherers didn't go around gathering up vegetables because they didn't exist. They gathered eggs. They gathered nuts. They gathered berries. Whatever they could find during the season, they would gather them. And then they would use them throughout the year to supplement, like I said, kind of like a trail mix. They probably even dried a lot of the fruit and ate it with the nuts. Sounds like an idea to me. But I don't think they had 2-pound bags for $3 at Walmart in the Paleolithic period. So you have to kind of think, how would they have made a fruit smoothie every day? Well, they couldn't. It's just that simple. So what did they eat? They ate what was provided, and that was the fat of the land. It was animals. It was what they could gather during their hunt and during their day to flavor their food. Maybe they used some dried herbs for flavoring meat. There's stories about that in the Bible even. but that doesn't go back 20, 30,000 years. So we have to keep it in perspective. If you got into a time machine and you just went back 30,000 years and now you're setting in what in the future is your yard, what would be there for you to eat? Well, there would always be some form of animals and something to gather. Eggs in a bird's nest, maybe some wild berries. But 95% of the food you would be allowed to eat based on where you live would be meat-based. It would be animals. Vegetarians and vegans could not exist 30,000 years ago. There was not enough available. It's just that simple. It's math. It didn't exist. They couldn't have banana smoothies because they didn't have bananas in their area. So that is my take on going paleo. There's a lot of reasons to consider the paleo diet. It's a good diet. It's hands down better than any of the diets you will see on TV because they're just meal plans. Not like food that you order and they send you, but they're all a meal plan. They're a structured, low-calorie meal plan. They cut your calories way low so you lose weight because that's the goal. And then most of the foods they recommend, which you see in a lot of my diet reviews on Jenny Craig and all that, are still following basically the supermarket diet and the old worn-out carbs good, fat bad. Well, we know that fat was the primary fuel or food for the Paleolithic man. So understanding how your body works is key to finding a diet that will bring you to a state of good health and wellness. Our bodies burn fuel a certain and specific way, and it has done so since the Paleolithic man. It runs on fat, not carbohydrates. I know that for a fact, and so do you, because carbohydrates did not exist in the variety we have today, and it did not exist until we became agricultural based 10,000 years ago. So from that period back into the paleo time, we survived as a species. Paleolithic man lived 20 and 10,000 years before we became agricultural based. So it appears that most people are ignoring close to 20,000 years of the Paleolithic man and the food they ate. So you can know pretty much based on reasoning, logic, and science that the Paleolithic man did not eat carbs because they were not available. They might have had them from time to time like we discussed, but it was not 70% of their caloric intake. It couldn't be because that much did not exist. So it's safe to say that carbs bad, fat good, and you have to put that in your diet plan and go, okay, for me to eat healthy like the paleo man, I need to eat meat. My plate needs to be covered with steak or a big hamburger patty with an egg or two on top. Not a bunch of side dishes of potatoes, sweet potatoes, and veggies. They didn't exist back in the day, so why eat them now? Our body chemistry has not changed. We are the same as the Cro-Magnon man, which is now the paleo guy. And so they were similar to us in every way, and that's why they stopped calling them the paleo or the Cro-Magnon man, because they were so similar in characteristics that they decided to call them modern man. They just put like a little word in front of that, and damn, I wished I would have written that down or I'd say it. So our biochemistry is the same as the paleo dude, and they didn't eat this stuff, and what they did eat, we still have available to us. The problem is we have too much available to us, and we think it's important. And it seems like with the paleo diet, they're buying into some of the myth that you need to stay away from fat. Even though they tell you to eat meat, they're telling you lean meat. Even though they're telling you you need oil, or fat in the form of oil, They're saying to get it from plants. The body doesn't metabolize those oils the same as it would if it got it from fat. So there are differences. They're slight, but they are there. And for the Paleolithic diet or the paleo diet to run so parallel in belief structure in those categories I read, like with meat, fish, seafood, eggs, vegetables, some fruit, nuts, and natural oils, they're running real parallel to a Paleolithic diet, but they're picking up a lot of hitchhikers along the way, which are lean meat, meaning they want you to get more protein. I see it all the time on TV and in shows. I need protein, a good protein source. The survivors found this, which is high in protein. What about fat? That's what the body burns as fat. It either burns fat or glucose. That's it. If you're eating carbs, then you're not burning fat. Protein is not a fat. It's protein. 66% of it is a carbohydrate. So they picked up the hitchhiker of lean meat because they don't like fat. They tell you to eat natural oils. But when they talk about natural oils, they're talking about plant derivatives. So once again, they're trying to scoop up some of the belief structure of healthy fat, healthy oil, bad oils. No, you can't do that. If you're paleo, you're paleo. You kill an animal and you eat it. You take the fat from that animal and maybe you put it in your frying pan if you happen to have one or you've invented one. And then you can saute your vegetables. That's how a paleo man would have done it if he had vegetables in a frying pan. He wouldn't squeeze an almond until it leaked a bunch of oil into his pan. He would just take a chunk of fat and spread it around there. So this is kind of my Going Paleo edition, and the podcast in the article Modern Day Hunter-Gatherers goes over this a little bit in written form. And then also the article on farming, basically, and hunting will go into these side branches of this podcast. We didn't farm and we weren't agricultural back in the Paleolithic times, so you can't go paleo if you're going to be eating grains. That's a big no-no. And to think that farming has brought us all of these new vegetables is a blessing. It's not. We cannot process cellulose, which is what plants are made up of. So all the nutritional value in those plants we can't get to unless we take an unnatural enzyme that our body does not produce. So you're not being paleo there. And then as far as hunting, to be a hunter-gatherer nowadays is very difficult. Even watching a lot of the Alaskan shows like Life Below Zero, these people live out in Alaska, and yet they can only kill certain games certain times of the year. One of the guys can't even help his wife do certain things because she's a native Alaskan and he is not, so he can't pull the trigger. It's very hard to go paleo, caveman in today's modern world. You cannot be a hunter-gatherer unless you're going to try to be what they're calling nowadays rewilding or become a mountain man. But even then they have to follow the laws. And so you just can't go chase down a woolly mammoth and kill it, because if they existed, it'd be on the endangered species list and you wouldn't be able to kill it anyway. So you can't go true Paleolithic in today's modern world, but you can eat a lot of fat and you can get it from the foods you can buy at the supermarket and the animals that you can or are allowed to hunt. But that's seasonal, and therefore what is not seasonal nowadays are the carbs. You can get strawberries year-round depending on where you live because they're shipped in from somewhere. And there's always avocados, which nobody even knew what an avocado was probably 10,000 years ago, but now you can get them aplenty. Unfortunately, you can farm in your backyard, but you can't hunt. And hunter-gatherers hunted and killed animals. They gathered eggs and nuts and berries. They weren't gathering up their crops. So they weren't farmers. They were gatherers. So that's my rant a little bit on Going Paleo. I just thought I would do a little podcast to kind of explain my take on it and let you know why you really can't. As much as we would all love to go back and become the true hunter-gatherer and be healthy and all of that. We can't do it. We can simulate it by buying good meat, staying away from carbs, staying away from grains, not overeating nuts just because they're available, and make our plate 90% meat and fat, not lean meat, meat. Don't micromanage it. Just eat meat. If it's a steak, who cares how much protein is in that piece of meat as opposed to fat? Don't buy lean cuts of meat. Don't have them trim the fat off. Just get the steak the way it came off the animal and eat it. Are we taking chances? Sure we are. There's a lot of hormones in the meat now, and the meat is fattened with the carbs, at the feedlot. But the animal has processed a lot of that stuff out of it by turning it into fat. Is it still in the meat? I think so, yes. But that's our choice. Unless you're going to become truly a hunter and go out and get drawn, and hopefully, and be able to shoot something year round and keep your freezer stocked, which, that's not very paleo either, because they had to dry their meat, so they probably ate it pretty quick. But we have options. We can try to simulate the Paleolithic period in the way humans ate back then, but we will never be able to do it completely. It will never be as pure and wholesome as it was then because of the hormones and the GMOs. And so it's tough, but to think that just because you're on a paleo diet means that you are a caveman, or if you're eating the caveman diet, you're not. You're close, but you will never be able or allowed to eat that types of food, because now our problem is those foods don't exist. There are no natural wild animals out there that don't have hormones and being infected with pesticides and all that. Even if it's just a wild boar out there, it's eating stuff that's contaminated. The water's contaminated. It's just the way it is. So Paleolithic man could not eat a lot of fruits and berries and smoothies. And now we, as humans and modern Paleolithic wannabes, cannot eat the same wild meat that was available to them. So things have changed, and the only thing we can do to really get a diet that is healthy for us, which is mainly the reason for Hello High Fat Diet, is to filter through all of the information and to put together your own diet. And so that's why I do the diet reviews, because they're garbage, most of them. And I haven't done a review on the paleo, the ketogenic, or the low-carb, high-fat diets, because they are a lifestyle, not a fad or a flash in the pan. So when you break down all those diets, you will see a lot of similarities, and most of them have to do with eat more fat, stay away from carbs. And I think if we can make that step in that direction and cut our carbs, stop substituting all these things and going, oh, but gee, I really miss my blah, blah, blah. Just stop, eat a lot of fat, stop eating lean, stay away from carbs, and just find the best food you can. Now, the Paleolithic diet is a kind of against milk, or most of the different types of paleo diet. I don't think of milk as from lactating animals anymore like the paleo does. To me, it's a food source. It's high in fat, and it's got all that good stuff in it that we're supposed to be eating naturally. It's got vitamin D naturally. They have to put it back in because the homogenation process has taken that out of it. But what they're putting back in existed in there naturally, and pretty much at the same proportions. They try to make it just like it was before they screwed it all up. So I like milk because it has a high fat content. It's got a lot of calories, very little carbohydrates. In my coffee, and what I do a lot with, in every day, is the heavy whipping cream. Very high in fat, very high in calories. And so once we figure it all out through research, personal research and study and trial and error, we will see that eating meat for every meal and not worrying about how pretty your plate looks like with all the presentation on it, and just eat meat and stay away from sodas and stuff, we will be jumping light years ahead of what everyone else is doing. Our health will be so much better, and we will just have more energy and feel better. But I can't recommend a diet. I can't make a diet plan. because I am not a doctor, and that would be really silly. I'm thinking of trying to put together some of the better diets that are out there, put together by doctors as a reference to where you can look at it and go, oh, this diet's pretty good. It's by Dr. So-and-so. Then I don't get in trouble. But before any of that can happen, we need to grasp and get an understanding of the food we eat and what happens to that biochemically once we swallow it. Our body doesn't read the label. It just swallows food. The enzymes are geared up and start setting the pathways in motion as soon as it starts breaking down and metabolizing, and it determines where it goes and how it is used. There are only 2 types of fuel that you will ever be able to eat as a human being. One of them is fat, the other is glucose. So you got glucagon and you got glucose. If you eat sugar, it is a known fact that your insulin levels get up past 32 and it shuts down fat burning. Fat burning in your body fat, the fat that you ate, all stops. So to me, it's a very easy choice. If you turn right, you're going to have a lot of energy and you're going to be eating fat and you're going to feel better, and your body will burn every calorie that you consume. Or you can turn left, eating sugar and carbs and getting sicker. But those are your only 2 choices. There's turn left or turn right. There is no go straight. So that's how the body works. Once we get our head around it, we will feel so much better. So I want to thank you at least for listening to my rambling. I don't always do outlines because to me a podcast is more like just a conversation. Unfortunately, it's only one-sided because there's no one here for me to talk to, which does lead me to the point I'm thinking of doing webinars. It's kind of costly, but then it would really be a conversation and it could kind of just come and go as a conversation without big outlines and without trying to sell, because most webinars are a sales type of product. I just want it for conversation, kind of like Facebook Live, but I haven't gotten to that point mentally because I'm afraid of cameras and I don't like looking at myself on camera. Doing the trends and the diet reviews is hard enough. And I guess there's that fear of failure if I do a webinar and no one shows up. So send me an email at mark@hello-high-fat-diet. You can go to Facebook and there's the 20,000 year journey, and that's a group. And there's also the Hello High Fat Diet page, and you can leave me a comment there. Let me know if you think that webinars might be a good thing. I'm not worried about it being a good thing as far as revenue generation or any of that other happy crap. I just want to know, do you think it would be good and it would be something you would be interested in being a part of, to where we could have more of a conversation or a conference call type thing, to where we could maybe throw more ideas out there and get more information. So let me know on that. Also, this is just a kind of a new outline for the website, to where the homepage will be this month's basically like an issue. All the other material is still there, all the posts and the videos and all that. But I thought it'd be kind of cool because I was at the doctor's office with my wife the other day. She was having some outpatient surgery, and I was looking at magazines thinking, those look kind of cool. They're eye-catching. I like that magazine issue is all about travel, or all about kayaking, or all about, and I thought, that's kind of neat. I want to emulate that. So that's what I'm going to be going toward as far as the look of Hello High Fat Diet. It's still in its infancy, and I'm trying to make something that looks really cool. Your input is always welcome on how it looks and the way I write and all that. There's usually some form of something at the end of every post, to where you can either take a quiz, or you can shoot me a testimonial, or any of that stuff. There's always comments somewhere at the bottom, and those are Facebook comments. So all you got to do is leave a comment. I don't have to worry about robots and spam and all that stupid stuff that just is annoying. So let me know what you think of the new look of the homepage. All the other pages will obviously be the same. I'm trying to make it look really cool, even though what it looks like is not as important as what we learn. But hey, even a classroom has to have some decoration, or we just sit there and go, this is boring. So that's it for Going Paleo, the October issue of Hello High Fat Diet. And it's not really an issue, but I like the way it sounds. I think next issue we're going to be going ketogenic. I'm not sure because to me, like I've said, there's only 3 diets or lifestyles that I think are worth really, really looking at. And that is paleo, keto, and low carb, high fat. The rest of them, like I said, are just meal plans. So those 3, I think we can look at and crunch down and kind of glue back together into a perfect diet for human beings that will make us all feel better. These articles and this post and this podcast are not to teach you all about paleo. It's just to have a conversation about people that might be thinking, I should try the paleo diet. Well, there's things to look at, and we went over those, and I hope it was helpful. So a quick overview of this podcast is we're talking about Paleolithic diet and some of the good and some of the bad things about the Paleolithic diet, the realities of eating paleo, and how science and regulations and life in general and all the BS that's out there have, in my opinion, skewed the paleo diet to something that is not truly Paleolithic. Going over the foods you can eat and what you can't eat or should eat and should not eat and why it matters and why it doesn't. I hope this podcast helped you get a good feel for the paleo diet. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please let me know. Thanks a ton. We will talk